the aim of the government is to make sure that exports are pushed up. In the past, it was the emphasis was not so much on exports because India was a domestic consumer-driven economy. But now we open up to the world. We want to export more. We want to engage more with the rest of the world. And even though conditions are becoming difficult outside, India's exports have been going up.
Welcome to the Gist on StratNews Global. Hello, I'm Surya Gangadharan. My guest for this edition of the Gist is Anil Wadhwa, former Secretary East in the External Affairs Ministry. He was also ambassador in Thailand, in Poland, and other places. Ambassador, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you very much.
We are going to talk about the visit of the European delegation tomorrow. I understand it's the first one of its kind, representing all the members of the Union. Ambassador, it's taken a long time for a delegation of this kind to come. What's the big thing that you're looking at?
Well, I think what has triggered this is the events that have happened since 2022 between India and the European Union, primarily in the field of trade and investment, and also in the field of technology transfers and high technology, which the European Union now sees as a promising area of cooperation with India. So, Trade and Technology Council held its first meeting on an earlier occasion, but this is the second time they're meeting. And this has given some time for the European Union to also reconsider their stance as far as India is concerned. The world developments, the geostrategic developments that have happened over the past year in particular, and since the Ukraine war, has also helped in making the European Union realize that India can be a useful and a strategic partner in true sense of the word.
Is the timing of this visit a little off, sir? I know they are decided well in advance, but given the kind of tensions we've seen in the US EU relationship, is this okay? I mean,
Well, the as you said rightly, the timing of the visit was decided much earlier, and it takes time, at least about a 6 month lead time for a delegation of this sort to put together. But the tensions with the United States, especially following the Munich Security Conference, have actually given a context to this visit as well, and I think for the better, because the European Union now feels that it needs to be self-reliant in terms of not only security and defense, but also in terms of the relationships that it forges around the world in order to take its trade and investment forward with different players, new players which are emerging, and also the old players that it used to deal with earlier.
are you implying that this rift between Europe and the US is permanent? Is going to get worse?
I would not say so. I think there is a reason behind this because it's and very important to understand that. Now we got a hint of that in the JD Vance speech in the Munich Security
Yeah.
Conference when he said that the current leadership in Europe has ignored its own voters and their desires and their aspirations. And why did he say that? Because the Trump administration feels that the right wing parties, in particular in Europe, are the ones closer in ideology to the current Trump administration. And it feels that the liberal policies, so called liberal policies of the current European leadership, have actually failed to provide Europe with its own self reliance and self defense, which it needs. So, for a long time now, the United States, especially after the Trump's first term, has been trying to talk to the Europeans about relying on themselves and contributing more to their own defense and security. And on the other hand, they've also been talking, recently to the Europeans about what they should be doing in terms of freeing up regulations, and that
Mhm.
applies mostly to the digital space and also to the tariffs that the Europeans have imposed upon their own industries and also upon others. CBAM, for example, is one of those instances where the regulatory mechanisms are actually stifling the industry in Europe, and that
Mhm.
is leading also to a sort of dissatisfaction with the voters, because this comes in the back of migration policies that have been quite liberal as far as Europeans are concerned, and the right
Yeah.
wing parties definitely are opposed to it, just as the Trump administration is opposed to it.
Mhm. What do you think we can expect from Europe in this round of discussions? I would presume it's going to be a far more extended thing that's going to happen. But what are we looking at from Europe?
Well, look, as far as India is concerned, there are many things which India would look for, and the focus this time is going to be technology and trade mainly. So you're talking about semiconductors, AI, or the green tech and supply chain, in supply chains in particular. And then of course there is also the defense angle, because in terms of defense trade and investments, Europe is a good partner for India.
Hmm.
Europeans are also interested in making sure that they're present, for example, in the fusion center in Gurugram. And lately, we've also seen a number of exercises that India has undertaken with the European Union. The last one, in fact, was off the Gulf of Guinea, far away from the Indian Ocean theater. So I
Yeah.
think there is a certain amount of trust and interoperability which is coming into force in this relationship as well. But mainly, I think it's the Trade and Technology Council meeting, where the focus will be on the transition economies in particular. And India is hoping to gain in terms of investments there, especially in the high tech areas.
Okay, we already have an FTA with the EFTA. I think with a bunch of European countries, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, among others.
Yes.
How's that moving?
So that is, I think, gone along quite well. The process of ratification in these countries is pretty long drawn out. And in the case of Switzerland, just to give you an example, after all the cantons have ratified it, it's only then that a treaty goes into force. It's not saying that there's
Mhm.
any problem with ratification, but it's just a process there which takes longer. But meanwhile, I think the industries in all these countries are preparing themselves quite well. They've launched delegations into India, and they have actually explored the possibility of investments. They've talked about a new investment treaty between India and these countries as part of
Mhm.
this EFTA. And once that comes into force, then I think it'll pave the way for much better, facilitation for the industry in these countries to come to India to invest in areas that they would like to, and also India wants. And I say this very in particular as to what India wants, because it just can't be consumer goods and other
Yeah.
industries. It has to be something which is more high tech, and India has made it quite clear that this is what we are looking for.
Mhm. That EFTA took a lot of time to negotiate. Do you expect the same kind of pace at which the India EU FTA, I mean, is being starting again? Do you expect again a slow paced move towards an FTA with the EU?
Look, comparatively speaking, I think EFTA was concluded quite fast in the end, and that is exactly what has happened to some other free trade agreements that India has signed recently. For example, the ECTA with Australia and also the agreement with UAE, for instance,
Yeah,
were concluded in very short periods of time.
true.
And I think it's the bent of mind of the current government to make sure that more and more countries are opened up for trade and investment, and that would stand it in good stead. And I think going forward, if we look at the history of the India EU negotiations, we started back in 2007, and after that, there was the process was given up in 2013. We started again in 2022, and since
Hmm.
then, we've made quite a number of rounds of consultations. Progress has been not very fast, but at the same time, it's not being very disappointing either. There are some
Hmm.
sticking points which we both understand now. I believe that the UK India FTA, which is being negotiated right now, if it gets to a conclusion, then that would
Hmm.
definitely help and provide a fillip to the India EU FTA as well. And not to say
Mhm.
that the process is easy, because there are 27 countries to convince. Each
Yeah.
one of them has a different interest. So it's a very diverse kind of mix of countries that we're dealing with here. But I think we are getting there slowly and slowly. We're making progress.
In that sense, do you think bilaterally negotiated treaties will work better?
Well, definitely the bilateral treaties do work better, but in the case of the European Union, unfortunately, we can't negotiate a bilateral treaty with any of them, because it's the
Yeah.
European Commission which controls the free trade agreements. So they have to negotiate as a bloc, and that's the reason why it's taken so long.
Qualitatively, sir, do you think an FTA with a huge bloc like the EU, which has technology on its side, a huge market, does that make better sense than the agreements we've signed with the UAE and other countries?
Look, I think if you look at the totality of the trade or investments between UAE and India and compare that with the EU, UAE is quite very much up there in terms of the volume and
Yeah.
the amount of interactions that India has with that country. So I think it was worth signing that, in my view. It has actually helped a lot in terms of also attracting other GCC countries like Oman to make that effort to get into a free trade agreement with India. I believe
Hmm.
that one is also very close to signature. So I think each country, we have to look at it on its own merit. It's important to have as many as we can, provided they are beneficial to India. And that's been a big debate as far as FTAs is concerned. Historically, traditionally, we've adopted different stances, and the earlier generation of FTAs were not seen as beneficial to India, for instance.
Yeah.
But the current ones that are in progress now, over the past few years, we've seen definite benefits.
You mentioned technology is one of the key areas where India and the EU are going to negotiate. Where does the EU stand when it comes to, say, technology transfer, technology sharing, which is what we really want?
So I think the European Union would like to see a new bilateral investment treaty, the BIT as we call it. Now,
Hmm.
as you know, India used to have a series of these agreements with a number of countries in the past, which included the European Union countries. But the one in 2016, which we put forward as a model treaty, had very few takers,
Hmm.
mainly because of the dispute settlement mechanism in it. And currently, views have been expressed even from the people in the government, that we need to relook at that and perhaps have a new generation of bilateral investment treaties. We made a beginning in terms of what we signed with the UAE, which was signed after the FTA, and
Hmm.
that has given good results. It's working satisfactorily so far, and that could become a model, for example, for future free trade agreements and bilateral investment treaties. So I think with the European Union, if we do that, then we will be on a good wicket, because European Union is most concerned about the time taken in terms of resolution of disputes.
Hmm. Hmm. Tell me, sir, the push towards FTAs and more trade suggests that there is a huge change or transformation in thinking in commerce ministry, in the government. Is this what we are looking at going forward?
So I think one has to look at it in a totality of the developments with regard to our exports, and in terms of what we need in terms of our technology infusion into the country.
Hmm.
Now, there's a realization that since we've not signed on to RCEP, for instance, we are
Yeah.
out of that regional agreement, and it's better to then look at other partners on a standalone basis. Now, if you look at RCEP, the membership in RCEP, we have free trade agreements with most of the countries over there, barring China and New
China.
Zealand, for instance. But in terms of the European Union, this is a big chunk. The EFTA countries have come on board, and now the UAE has happened. With Australia, we have a successfully running ECTA agreement. So all those are the results are starting to flow in. What India also needs at the same time is technology flow into the country, into the high tech areas, which helps in the transition of the country. to the green economy, which is the aim of the government, and also in the process helping out in terms of manufacturing boost in the country through the PLI schemes or even otherwise the schemes that the
Mm-hmm.
government has and the corridors that has created, for example, in the defense sector. So
Yeah.
when you look at that totality, the aim of the government is to make sure that exports are pushed up. In the past, it was the emphasis was not so much on exports because India was a domestic consumer driven economy. But now we open up to the world. We want to export more. We want to engage more with the rest of the world. And even though conditions are becoming difficult outside, India's exports have been going up.
Hmm. Are we also looking at a migration and mobility agreement with the EU?
Yes, of course. We are constantly in dialogue with the European countries on an individual basis. Many of
Hmm.
these migration and mobility agreements have been signed already. I think the government will continue to pursue these, as we go along, even as the FTA negotiations are on and we are negotiating the bilateral investment treaty. Migration and mobility is important in today's context because many of the European countries want to see regulated labor coming into their
Yeah,
countries and also
yeah.
control illegal migration, which is what the government of India also endorses. And we've seen that in the case of many countries, which has happened already. These agreements are working satisfactorily at a bilateral level, for instance, with Italy, with countries like Germany. We know that there is a niche market of particular kinds of services. And if there is migration which takes place in a legal manner, then it provides stability to that relationship, and there is no cause for suspicion on either side
Hmm.
because the whole process is very regulated, and it also keeps out the illegal migration.
Hmm. Do you expect that the rise of right-wing governments could, in that sense, reverse the thing on migration, mobility, maybe even the FTA?
Look, as far as the regulated migration is concerned, where we know that most of the countries require certain kinds of labor because of pressure on populations, and
Yeah,
also the inability of the local population to service certain industries. Just to give you an example, for example, the industry of mozzarella cheese in Italy is heavily dependent on Indian labor,
yeah.
which actually is into this industry. In between 90 to 95% of this industry has an Indian input. And so there are many such areas in the European Union today where they require regulated labor. So that means the people are there on contracts and they finish their contract and they go back to their respective countries, not overstaying.
Yeah.
And also, there's that avoids the illegal migration and other people who are entering the country illegally from doing so because there's no requirement in the market for them.
Hmm. So, last question on the defense part of it.
Hmm.
Where are we going with Europe on defense? Since much of our defense relationship in Europe, at least, appears to be focused on the French.
I think while the French-India relationship in defense is quite high profile, mainly because of the aircraft sales and
Yeah,
technology transfers related to that. But if you look at other countries like Spain, Germany, Italy, etc., they're equally robust. And in terms of these countries, you're actually getting some very important spares and supplies. They're also now getting into areas where they are sourcing from India because there's a number of defense startups which have started in India. Government is encouraging that, and they want to tie up with the private sector in India as well. So the
hmm,
defense sector is getting more robust, I would say. And I think Europe provides a good source of technology transfers and joint venture partnerships, which must be encouraged going forward.
hmm. Is there a level of comfort with the EU ambassador? I mean, you've been ambassador in Italy, and you
Yes.
know the general sense. I mean, say vis-a-vis the US, or when you compare US and Europe, is the comfort factor with Europe far greater?
I can't say, I can't talk about US, but I think I will confine myself to the European experience. I think in Europe, we've been quite comfortable dealing with the defense companies there and also with the governments because of the regulation and also because of the fact that there's an inbuilt sense of fair practices into
Mhm.
dealings with these companies in Europe, and ranging from small spares and equipment to apparel and clothing for our like winter wear for our troops, for example, fire equipment on ships. Everything is produced by the European Union companies. And the bilateral relationship with them has worked pretty well. They're reliable suppliers, and at the same time, there has been very little cause of friction so far. So I think the relationship is going well, barring a few cases that we've had which have been high profile, like the Augusta Western case, which you know
Yeah.
about, and some others which in which some European companies were involved. But barring that, I think by and large it's been a very smooth relationship.
Ambassador, in foreign policy wise, are we on the same page? Ukraine and so on. I mean, where do you see these challenges coming up?
Well, foreign policy wise, in terms of Europe, I think mainly the challenge will be in terms of adapting similar kinds of policies on trade, which give us satisfaction, and the EU is also happy with it. One of the sticking points, for example, is the CBAM,
Yeah,
which is the carbon, tax, which
border
border
mechanism.
adjustment
Yeah.
mechanism tax, which has been introduced first for six products, and then after that, it will be extended in the future. Now, that's a double edged sword, I would say, because that will also provide a fillip to the Indian industry to actually modernize, to reduce, its carbon emission. And in the process, it will help it to export to some other markets as well, because we don't know what the future is, and what the export profile will look like in the future, what the demands of the countries are going to be. And Indian industry should, in the process, become more competitive. But on the other hand, at the same time, to make that transition so quickly for the small and medium enterprises in India is not so easy. So government will have to pay particular attention to those wherever possible. We're talking about exemptions, for example, with the UK, and now in the EU negotiations also. CBMs
Mhm.
will figure prominently, but I have a feeling that in some ways we will have to adjust to that going forward, and also in the process make our industry much more competitive.
Mhm. Ambassador Wadhwa, we are at the end of our time. You've given us a great perspective on the visit of this EU delegation. Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you, sir.
My pleasure.
Thank you. That's all we have for you now on this edition of The Gist. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media. Thank you very much. Good day.